Zorya Holloway woke up with her head resting against a stranger's chest on the last subway train of the night, and when she looked up, she realized she'd fallen asleep on the most dangerous man in the city, Kang Min-jae, Korean Mafia boss, a man who controlled empires built on blood and fear, and he was staring down at her like she'd just become his newest problem. Within hours, Zorya found herself trapped inside his fortified mansion, held captive because her estranged father had stolen millions from Min-jae's organization years ago. Now she wasn't just collateral, she was leverage. But the longer she stayed, the more dangerous the truth became. The man holding her prisoner was starting to look at her like she mattered more than revenge. If you want to see how far this story can travel, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's see where this wild ride takes us. Oh, the rain came down in cold sheets across the city, turning the cracked pavement into black mirrors that reflected nothing but emptiness. Zorya Holloway stood under the diner's flickering neon sign at 1:30 in the morning, her second-hand sneakers already soaked through, her apron still reeking of burnt coffee and grease. Her fingers ached from carrying heavy plates for 14 hours straight. Her lower back screamed every time she shifted her weight, and her bank account sat at negative $47 because the landlord had cashed her rent check early and her paycheck hadn't cleared yet. She pulled her thin jacket tighter and started walking toward the subway station 6 blocks away through streets that got quieter and more dangerous with every step. This was her life now, 24 years old and barely surviving in a city that chewed people up and forgot their names before their bodies even hit the ground. No family except a mother working night shifts at a hospital across town. No friends because working doubles didn't leave time for friendships. No safety net. No backup plan. Just the crushing weight of existence pushing down on her shoulders every single day. The subway platform was nearly empty when she arrived. A homeless man slept curled against a concrete pillar. 2 teenagers whispered and laughed in the corner, their voices echoing off dirty tile walls. Zorya leaned against a support beam and closed her eyes, waiting for the train that would carry her home to a studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and a landlord who'd already threatened eviction twice this year. She was so tired she could barely think straight. The train finally screeched into the station, brakes shrieking like something dying in the dark. The doors hissed open. Zorya stumbled inside and collapsed into the first empty seat she found near the back of the car, and that's when exhaustion completely took over. Her eyes drifted shut. Her head tilted sideways, and before she could stop herself, she fell asleep against the shoulder of the man sitting beside her. She didn't know how long she'd been out when awareness slowly crept back in. The first thing she noticed was warmth, expensive fabric beneath her cheek, the faint scent of cologne that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Her brain tried to shake off the fog of sleep, tried to make sense of where she was and what she was doing. Then panic hit her like ice water. Zorya's eyes snapped open and she jerked upright so fast her vision blurred. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." Her voice died in her throat. Because the man she'd been sleeping against wasn't just some random commuter. He sat perfectly still in a black suit that looked like it had been tailored by someone who understood power and money in ways Zorya never would. His posture was controlled, predatory, like he'd spent his entire life learning how to take up space without asking permission. Dark hair swept back from a face that was sharp and handsome in a way that felt dangerous. High cheekbones, strong jaw. Eyes so dark they looked black under the flickering subway lights. And he was staring directly at her, not with anger, not with annoyance, with something far more unsettling. Curiosity. I'm really sorry, Zorya stammered again, her heart hammering against her ribs. I worked a double shift and I guess I just... That's when she noticed the other men, 4 of them, standing in perfectly spaced positions around the subway car like silent sentinels. All dressed in dark suits, all watching her with the kind of cold attention that made her skin crawl. None of them blinked, none of them moved. They just stood there like statues guarding something precious or dangerous. The train rattled through another tunnel, and Zorya realized with growing horror that the car was completely empty except for her, the man in the expensive suit, and his 4 terrifying companions. "What's your name?" The man's voice was deep and calm, with an accent that wrapped around the English words like silk over steel. Korean, maybe. Zorya wasn't sure. She was too busy trying not to hyperventilate. "I should go," she said quickly, standing up on shaking legs. "This is my stop anyway." It wasn't. She lived 3 more stations down the line, but survival instinct screamed at her to get off this train immediately. "Sit down!" It wasn't a request. Zorya's knees buckled and she dropped back into the seat before her brain could catch up with her body. The man's dark eyes never left her face. "Your name," he repeated. "Zorya." The word came out barely above a whisper. Zorya Holloway. Something flickered across the man's expression. Recognition, maybe. Or calculation. He tilted his head slightly, studying her the way someone might study an interesting puzzle. "Do you know who I am, Zorya Holloway?" She shook her head. Her mouth had gone completely dry. "My name is Kang Min-jun." The name meant nothing to her, but the way he said it, with the quiet confidence of someone who expected the entire world to know exactly who he was, made her stomach twist with fear. "I don't want any trouble," Zorya said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I was just trying to get home." "I know." The train slowed as it approached the next station. The doors hissed open. Nobody got on. Nobody got off. One of the bodyguards made a subtle gesture, and the doors closed again. They kept moving. Zorya's pulse spiked. "What do you want from me?" Min-jun leaned back in his seat, his movements smooth and unhurried. "Tell me about your father." The question hit her like a punch to the chest. "What?" "Your father, Marcus Holloway. Where is he?" Ice flooded Zorya's veins. She hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in almost 5 years, not since the night her father disappeared without explanation, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills and a mother who cried herself to sleep for 6 months straight. "I don't know," Zorya said honestly. "He left when I was 19. I haven't heard from him since." Min-jun's expression didn't change. "You're lying." "I'm not." Desperation crept into her voice now. "I swear I don't know where he is. He just vanished one day and never came back, please. I don't know what this is about, but I don't have anything to do with whatever your father stole from me." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. $17 million, Min-jun continued, his voice still perfectly calm, moved through 6 different offshore accounts before disappearing completely, along with Marcus Holloway. Zorya felt like the floor had dropped out from underneath her. $17 million. The number was so big it didn't even feel real. Her father had been a mid-level accountant at some consulting firm. Boring. Predictable. The kind of man who complained about traffic and fell asleep watching baseball games. Not the kind of man who stole $17 million from someone like Kang Min-jun. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know." "I believe you." That should have been comforting. It wasn't, because Min-jun's next words destroyed whatever fragile hope she'd been clinging to. "But that doesn't change the fact that you're coming with me." The train suddenly lurched to a stop. Not at a station, just stopped in the middle of the tunnel between stations. The lights flickered once, twice, then went completely dark. When they came back on 3 seconds later, 2 of the bodyguards had moved to block both exits. Zorya shot to her feet. "You can't do this. You can't just—" "I can do anything I want." Min-jun stood as well, his height and presence making the subway car feel impossibly small. "Your father took something that belongs to me. Until I get it back, you belong to me instead." "That's insane," Zorya said, her voice rising with panic. "You can't kidnap someone because of something their father did 5 years ago. I'll scream. I'll call the police. Who do you think runs the police in this city?" The question stopped her cold. Min-jun stepped closer, not threatening, not aggressive, just close enough that Zorya could see the absolute certainty in his eyes. The kind of certainty that came from a lifetime of people doing exactly what he told them to do. "You have 2 choices," he said quietly. "You can walk off this train with me now, cooperatively, and we can have a civilized conversation about how to locate your father and recover what he stole." He paused. "Or you can fight, scream, make this difficult, and I will still take you, but the process will be much less pleasant for both of us." Zorya's hands were shaking so hard she had to ball them into fists to make them stop. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something other than submit to this nightmare. But the cold logic of survival whispered something else. This man controlled everything. The train, the police, probably half the city. Fighting would accomplish nothing except getting her hurt, or worse. "If I go with you," she said carefully, "you won't hurt me. I have no interest in hurting you, Zorya. You're not my enemy. You're leverage." Somehow that was even more terrifying. Min-jun extended his hand. An invitation, or a command. Zorya wasn't sure which. She looked at his hand for a long moment, at the expensive watch on his wrist that probably cost more than she'd earned in 10 years, at the calm expression on his devastatingly handsome face that promised he would get exactly what he wanted no matter what she decided. Then she took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and completely certain. "Smart girl," Min-jun said softly. The train started moving again, but this time it didn't stop at the next station, or the one after that. It just kept going, deeper into the tunnels beneath the city, carrying Zorya Holloway away from the life she knew and into something far more dangerous. Zorya woke up in a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud. For 3 disoriented seconds, she thought she'd died and somehow ended up in whatever came after. Then reality crashed back in and she bolted upright, her heart racing. This wasn't her apartment. The room around her was massive, bigger than her entire studio. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens bathed in early morning light. The bed itself was enormous, covered in silk sheets that probably cost more than her car. Expensive artwork hung on cream-colored walls. A crystal chandelier sparkled overhead, and she was still wearing her diner uniform. Panic seized her chest as fragmented memories from the night before came flooding back. The subway. Min-jun. The drive through dark streets in a car with tinted windows so black she couldn't see where they were going. Being led through a mansion that looked like something out of a movie. A woman in a gray suit telling her to sleep, that everything would be explained in the morning. Now it was morning. And Zorya had no idea where the hell she was. She swung her legs off the bed and stood on shaking legs. Her phone was gone. Her bag was gone. Everything except the clothes on her body had been taken. The door opened before she could decide whether to scream or cry. The same woman from last night stepped inside. Mid-40s, Asian, dressed in an immaculate gray pantsuit that screamed professional efficiency. Her expression was neutral, but not unkind. "You're awake," the woman said. "Good. Mr. Kang would like to see you for breakfast." "I want to go home," Zorya said, her voice hoarse. "That's not possible. You can't keep me here. Mr. Kang has asked me to make you as comfortable as possible during your stay. There are fresh clothes in the closet. The bathroom is through that door. Breakfast will be served in 30 minutes. The woman turned to leave. "Wait," Zorya called out desperately. "Please, just tell me what's happening. What does he want from me?" The woman paused in the doorway, her expression softening slightly. "Mr. Kang will explain everything. My advice? Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Then she was gone. Zorya stood alone in the beautiful prison of a bedroom and tried very hard not to fall apart. Ugh. The breakfast room was smaller than she expected, but no less luxurious. Tall windows overlooked a greenhouse filled with exotic plants. A table set for 2 waited in the center of the room, covered with more food than Zorya had seen in months. Fresh fruit, pastries. Eggs cooked 3 different ways, coffee that smelled like heaven. And sitting at the head of the table, reading something on a tablet, was Min-jun. He looked different in daylight, still dangerous, still handsome in that sharp, controlled way. But the harsh subway lighting had hidden details that morning sun revealed. The faint scar along his left cheekbone, the tiredness around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights, the careful way he held himself, like a man who'd learned long ago that showing weakness invited death. He glanced up when she entered. "Sit." Zorya didn't move. "I want to call my mother. She'll be worried." "Your mother received a text from your phone this morning explaining that you're staying with a friend for a few days. She won't worry." "You can't just—" "Sit down, Zorya." His voice was still calm, still controlled, but underneath the politeness lived something harder, something that didn't take no for an answer. She sat. Min-jun set his tablet aside and poured coffee into her cup with the practiced ease of someone used to hospitality rituals. "Eat." "I'm not hungry. You worked 14 hours yesterday and slept through dinner. Eat." The command settled over her like a weighted blanket. Zorya picked up a piece of toast just to have something to do with her hands. Min-jae watched her for a moment, then spoke. I'm going to explain your situation, and then you're going to make a choice about how you want this arrangement to proceed. Arrangement? Bitterness crept into her voice. Is that what we're calling kidnapping now? 5 years ago, your father was contracted to handle financial consulting for several of my business operations. Legitimate operations on the surface. He had access to accounts, routing numbers, offshore holdings, and over the course of 18 months, he systematically diverted $17 million into accounts I couldn't trace. Min-jae's voice never changed, never rose. He could have been discussing the weather. When I discovered the theft, your father disappeared. Completely. No digital footprint, no credit card transactions, no contact with known associates. He became a ghost. He took a sip of coffee. I've spent 5 years looking for Marcus Holloway, and 3 weeks ago, one of my people found a connection I'd missed. A safety deposit box registered under your mother's maiden name. We accessed it yesterday. Zorya's chest tightened. What was in it? A letter, addressed to you, dated 6 months ago. Min-jae reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table. Zorya stared at it like it might explode. You read my mail? I read everything that might lead me to $17 million. Her hands shook as she unfolded the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably her father's, messy and slanted, just like she remembered. Zorya, if you're reading this, it means something went wrong and I didn't get the chance to explain in person. I know you hate me. You have every right to. I left without saying goodbye, left your mother struggling, left you to pick up pieces I broke. But I need you to understand something. The money I took wasn't just theft. It was survival. Kang Min-jae isn't a legitimate businessman. He's a monster who built his empire on violence and fear. I discovered things while working for him. Terrible things. And when I tried to expose him, he made it clear that everyone I loved would die if I didn't disappear. So I took his money as insurance, as leverage, as the only thing that might keep him from hunting down you and your mother once I was gone. I've hidden it somewhere he'll never find it, and I've stayed away to keep you safe. I'm sorry, baby girl. I'm so sorry. Dad Zorya read the letter twice before she could speak. When she finally looked up, Min-jae was watching her with that same unreadable expression. Is it true? She asked quietly. The things he said about you? Does it matter? Yes. Min-jae leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes never leaving her face. Your father worked for me willingly. I paid him well. Very well. And when he decided to betray that trust, he didn't expose anything to authorities. He didn't try to bring me down. He just stole $17 million and ran. That doesn't answer my question. I run an organization that operates outside conventional law. I make decisions most people would call immoral. I've hurt people who threatened what I've built. Does that make me a monster? He tilted his head slightly. Perhaps, but your father knew exactly what he was signing up for when he took my money. The honesty was somehow more terrifying than a lie would have been. What do you want from me? Zorya whispered. I want my money back. And I want your father to answer for his betrayal. I don't know where he is. I know, but he knows where you are. And eventually, his guilt will bring him out of hiding. Understanding crashed over her like a wave. You're using me as bait. Yes. What if he doesn't come? Then you stay here until I find another way to locate him. For how long? As long as it takes. Zarya's hands clenched into fists on the table. You can't just lock me up indefinitely because of something my father did. I can do whatever I want, Zorya. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for both of us. She wanted to scream, wanted to throw the coffee in his face and run for the nearest exit. But the cold reality of her situation pressed down on her like a physical weight. She had no phone, no money, no idea where she even was, and the man sitting across from her controlled everything. What about my job? She asked, hating how defeated she sounded. My rent? My life? Your rent has been paid through the end of the year. Your manager at the diner believes you're taking emergency family leave. All of your immediate financial obligations have been handled. You can't just, I already did. The casual way he dismantled her entire existence made her want to cry, or scream, or both. Min-jae stood and walked to the window, his back to her. I'm not going to lock you in your room. You're free to move around the estate, use the gym, the library, the gardens. But you will not leave the property, and you will not attempt to contact anyone outside these walls. He turned to face her again. If you follow those rules, you'll be treated well, comfortably. If you break them, the consequences will be immediate and severe. Do you understand? Zarya's throat was so tight she could barely breathe, but she nodded. Good. Min-jae walked toward the door, then paused. The woman you met this morning is Seo-yoon. She manages the household. If you need anything, ask her. What if I need to go home? Then you'll be disappointed. He left her sitting alone at the breakfast table, surrounded by luxury she'd never asked for and freedom she no longer had. The first week was the hardest. Zorya spent most of her time locked in the bedroom, refusing meals, refusing to speak to anyone who wasn't Min-jae himself. And Min-jae barely showed up. He'd appear once a day, usually in the evening, and ask the same question. Have you remembered anything about your father? Any detail that might help locate him? And every day Zorya gave the same answer. No. Then he'd leave, and she'd be alone again. But isolation became its own kind of torture. The silence pressed against her skull until she thought she'd lose her mind. So eventually she started exploring. The estate was massive, 10 bedrooms, a gym that looked like something from a luxury hotel, a library filled with books in Korean, English, and languages Zorya didn't recognize. Gardens that stretched for acres behind fortress walls topped with kameras and security lights. And everywhere she went, silent staff members watched her with careful eyes. Seo-yoon appeared often, offering fresh towels, suggesting meals, asking if Zorya needed anything. Always professional, always kind. But beneath the courtesy lived the unspoken truth. Seo-yoon worked for Min-jae, not for Zorya. 2 weeks into captivity, Zorya finally broke. She found Min-jae in his office, a massive room filled with dark wood furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline in the distance. He was working at his desk, reading through documents with the same focused intensity he brought to everything. I need to see my mother, Zorya said from the doorway. Min-jae didn't look up. No. Please, just once, just to prove I'm okay. She believes you're staying with a friend. There's no reason to complicate that narrative. Zorya stepped into the room, frustration finally overwhelming fear. You can't keep me here forever. I can keep you here as long as necessary. What if my father never contacts me? What if he's dead? What if... Then you'll remain here until I find another method of recovering what he stole. That's insane. Min-jae finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers with unsettling calm. You keep using that word. Insane. As if there's some universal morality that governs situations like this. There isn't. There's only power and consequences. Your father took something from me. You are the consequence. I'm a person, not a consequence. You're whatever I decide you are. The statement hung between them like a blade. Zorya's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. If you're going to keep me prisoner, at least let me do something useful. Let me work. You don't need to work. I need to feel like I'm not going insane sitting in that beautiful room all day with nothing to do but think about how completely you've destroyed my life. Something shifted in Min-jae's expression. Not quite guilt, but close enough. He stood and walked around the desk, stopping a few feet away from her. What do you want to do? Anything. I don't care. Clean, cook, organize your library. I just need something to occupy my brain before I lose my mind. Min-jae studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and sent a quick text. 30 seconds later, Seo-yoon appeared in the doorway. Take Zorya to the greenhouse, Min-jae said. Show her the orchid collection. If she wants to help maintain it, let her. Seo-yoon nodded and gestured for Zorya to follow. As they left, Min-jae's voice stopped her one more time. Zorya. She turned. This arrangement doesn't have to be unpleasant. I'm not interested in making you suffer. I'm interested in recovering what belongs to me. Then let me go. I can't do that. Can't or won't? Min-jae's expression darkened slightly. There's no difference. The greenhouse became Zorya's sanctuary. It was attached to the main house through a glass corridor and filled with hundreds of plants from all over the world. But the orchids were Min-jae's obsession. Rare species that required precise temperature control and careful cultivation. Whites and purples, and deep crimsons that bloomed in impossible patterns. Seo-yoon explained the watering schedule, the feeding routine, the humidity requirements. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Zorya felt like she could breathe. Working with the orchids gave her something to focus on besides the bars of her golden cage. She fell into a routine. Mornings in the greenhouse, afternoons reading in the library, evenings avoiding Min-jae as much as possible. But avoiding him became harder as the weeks passed, because Min-jae started showing up in unexpected places. She'd be reading in the library and he'd appear with his own book, settling into a chair across from her without speaking. She'd be eating breakfast alone and he'd join her, working on his tablet while she pretended he wasn't there. She'd be in the greenhouse and he'd walk through, checking on the orchids with an expertise that surprised her. "You actually care about these plants," Zorya said one afternoon, 3 weeks into her captivity. Min-jae was examining a white orchid that had just started blooming. "My mother grew orchids. She said they were proof that beauty requires discipline." It was the first personal thing he'd ever shared with her. "Where is she now?" Zorya asked carefully. "Dead. 12 years. I'm sorry." "Don't be. She died in her sleep, peacefully. More than most people in my world get." He moved to another plant, his movements precise and practiced. Zorya watched him work, trying to reconcile the dangerous man who'd kidnapped her with the person who cared about flowers. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask. I may not answer. Do you ever feel guilty?" Min-jae's hands paused briefly, then continued their work. "About what?" "About this. About taking someone's freedom because their father made a mistake 5 years ago." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't respond. Then he straightened and looked at her directly. "Guilt is a luxury I can't afford. The moment I start questioning decisions based on emotion instead of strategy, I become weak, and weakness in my world is fatal." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." They stood there surrounded by orchids and sunlight streaming through glass walls, and Zorya realized something terrifying. She was starting to understand him, not agree with him, not forgive him, but understand the cold logic that governed his life. "What happens when this is over?" she asked quietly. "When you find my father and get your money back? What happens to me?" Min-jae's dark eyes held hers. "I don't know yet." "That's not comforting." "I'm not trying to comfort you." "Then what are you trying to do?" "Keep you alive until this situation resolves itself." He turned and walked toward the greenhouse door, leaving her alone with the orchids and questions that had no good answers. 4 weeks into captivity, everything changed. Zorya was reading in her room when Seo-yoon knocked and entered without waiting for permission. Her expression was tight with controlled urgency. "Mr. Kang needs to see you immediately." "What's wrong?" "Now please." Zorya followed her through the mansion to Min-jae's office. The door was already open. Inside, Min-jae stood behind his desk with his phone pressed to his ear, his expression harder than she'd ever seen it. He ended the call as she entered. "Close the door." She did. Min-jae turned his laptop toward her. On the screen was an email. The sender's address was a random string of numbers and letters, but the message was clear enough. "You have something that belongs to me. I have something that belongs to you. Let's make a trade. Miller's Bay Pier. Friday midnight. Come alone or she dies." Zorya's blood turned to ice. "What is this?" "Your father," Min-jae said quietly. "He finally made contact. But he doesn't say—" "He's talking about you, Zorya. He knows I have you, and he's offering an exchange, you for the money." She should have felt relief. Her father was alive. Her father was trying to save her. But instead, fear flooded through her system, because the look on Min-jae's face promised that this negotiation wouldn't end peacefully. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. Min-jae's eyes met hers, dark and absolutely certain. "I'm going to get my money back, and your father is going to pay for 5 years of betrayal." "You're going to kill him?" "Yes." The single word dropped between them like a stone. "Please," Zorya said, her voice breaking. "Please don't do this. He's my father. He's a thief who's been hiding like a coward while you paid for his mistakes. He was trying to protect me. By stealing from the most dangerous man in the city? That's not protection, that's selfishness." Min-jae walked around the desk until he stood directly in front of her. This meeting is happening. You can choose to cooperate and make it as clean as possible, or you can fight me and make it messy. Either way, Friday night your father and I are going to have a conversation he won't survive. Zorya felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. What if I refuse to go? Then I'll tie you up and bring you anyway. The outcome doesn't change. She wanted to hate him, wanted to scream and claw at his perfect suit and tell him he was a monster who didn't deserve the air he breathed. But underneath the rage and fear lived something even more confusing, because part of her, some small traitorous part, understood exactly why Min-jae operated the way he did. In his world, mercy was weakness. Forgiveness invited destruction. And the only way to survive was to be more ruthless than everyone around you. I have 3 days, Zorya said quietly. To do what? To change your mind. Min-jae's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You won't succeed. Maybe. But I'm going to try anyway. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. Then he stepped back and returned to his desk. Seo-yun will take you back to your room. We'll discuss the logistics of Friday's meeting tomorrow. Zorya didn't move. If you do this, if you kill my father, you'll prove that everything he said about you in that letter was true. That you're a monster who destroys everything you touch. I already am that monster, Zorya. Your father just made the mistake of forgetting it. She left before the tears could betray her. That night, Zorya couldn't sleep. She lay in the massive bed staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning through impossible scenarios. Every option ended the same way, with her father dead and her still trapped in Min-jae's world. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and walked through the dark house toward the greenhouse. The building was lit from within, the plants casting long shadows against the glass walls. She found Min-jae already there. He sat on a bench near the orchid collection, still dressed in the same clothes from earlier, his expression tired and distant. He looked up when she entered but didn't speak. Zorya sat on the opposite end of the bench, careful to maintain distance between them. Can't sleep either? She asked. I don't sleep much. Why not? Old habits. When you grow up expecting someone to kill you in your sleep, unconsciousness becomes dangerous. The casual way he said it made her chest ache. Is that what your life was like? Before all this? Before I built this empire? Yes. He leaned back against the bench, his eyes fixed on the orchids. I grew up in Seoul. Poor neighborhood. Dangerous neighborhood. My father was involved with a gang that ran protection rackets and gambling operations. When I was 13, a rival organization killed him, cut his throat, and left him bleeding out in an alley. Zorya's breath caught. I'm sorry. Don't be. He wasn't a good man. But he was my father, and watching him die taught me an important lesson. What lesson? That the only way to survive in this world is to become the most dangerous person in the room, always. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by sleeping plants and the quiet hum of climate control systems. Is that why you can't let my father go? Zorya asked quietly. Because forgiveness looks like weakness? If I let your father walk away with $17 million and my pride, every person I've ever threatened, every organization I've ever dominated, will see it as proof that Kang Min-jae is getting soft. And they'll come for me, for everyone I protect, for this entire empire I've built over 20 years of blood and violence. He turned to look at her directly. Your father's death isn't personal, Zorya. It's survival. His survival or mine. And I choose mine. Every time. The honesty was devastating, because she could hear the truth underneath it. Min-jae wasn't a monster who enjoyed killing. He was a man who'd learned that mercy was a luxury that got you killed. What if there was another way? Zorya asked desperately. What if you could get your money back and prove your strength without killing him? There isn't. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Min-jae stood and walked toward the door. Get some sleep, Zorya. Friday is coming whether we're ready or not. He left her alone in the greenhouse, surrounded by beautiful things that required careful cultivation to survive. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Zorya wondered if maybe she and Min-jae weren't so different after all. Both of them trying desperately to survive in a world that punished weakness. Both of them trapped by choices other people had made. Both of them running out of time. Thursday morning arrived with gray clouds pressing down on the city like a threat. Zorya woke up with her stomach twisted into knots, knowing she had less than 48 hours before everything fell apart. She found Min-jae in the dining room, already working through breakfast with his tablet propped beside his plate. He didn't look up when she entered. "We need to talk," Zorya said. "No, we don't." "Yes, we do." She sat down across from him without waiting for permission. "You can't just execute my father without giving me a chance to—" "I can do whatever I want." Min-jae's voice was flat, final. "We've had this conversation already." "Then we're having it again." He finally looked up, his dark eyes cold in the morning light. "What exactly do you think is going to happen here, Zorya? You're going to appeal to my better nature? Convince me that family matters more than money? That forgiveness is strength instead of weakness? I think you're human underneath all this ice, and humans make choices that aren't always about survival." "You're wrong." "Am I?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Because the man who kidnapped me 4 weeks ago wouldn't have paid my rent, wouldn't have let me work in his greenhouse, wouldn't have sat with me at 2 in the morning talking about his dead mother." Something flickered across Min-jae's expression. Anger, maybe, or recognition that she'd hit too close to something real. "Those were strategic decisions," he said coldly. "Keeping you comfortable makes you easier to manage. Nothing more." "I don't believe you. I don't care what you believe." He stood abruptly, grabbing his tablet. "Seo-yoon will go over the logistics for tomorrow night. You'll wear what she tells you to wear. You'll say what I tell you to say. And when your father shows up, you'll stand exactly where I put you while I handle the rest." "And if I refuse?" Min-jae walked around the table until he stood directly behind her chair. She could feel the heat of him, the controlled violence that lived just beneath his expensive suit. "Then I'll have 2 of my men hold you down while I put a bullet through your father's skull. And you'll watch. Is that what you want?" Zorya's hands were shaking so hard she had to grip the edge of the table. "You're a bastard." "I know." He left her sitting there, surrounded by breakfast she couldn't eat and choices that didn't exist. Seo-yoon appeared an hour later with a garment bag and an expression that suggested she knew exactly how this conversation was going to go. "Mr. Kong wants you dressed appropriately for tomorrow," she said, laying the bag across Zorya's bed. "Appropriately for what? Watching my father get murdered?" Seo-yoon's face remained neutral. "For a negotiation." "It's not a negotiation if one side has already decided to kill the other. That's not my concern." Seo-yoon unzipped the bag, revealing a simple black dress. Elegant. Expensive. The kind of thing someone wore to funerals or extremely dangerous meetings. "There will be people watching tomorrow night. Rival organizations. Police on Min-jae's payroll. You need to look like you belong at his side, not like a hostage." Zorya stared at the dress. "I am a hostage." "Not tomorrow. Tomorrow, you're leverage. There's a difference." "What difference?" Seo-yoon met her eyes with something that might have been sympathy. "Hostages are disposable. Leverage is valuable. As long as Min-jae believes your father cares about you, you have power in this situation. Use it." "How?" "That's up to you to figure out." Seo-yoon left, and Zorya spent the next hour staring at the black dress like it was a death sentence she hadn't asked for. That afternoon, she went to the greenhouse looking for peace and found chaos instead. One of the white orchids, the one Min-jae's mother had supposedly started growing before she died, had collapsed. The stem broken. Petals scattered across the dirt like evidence of something precious destroyed. Zorya's chest tightened as she knelt beside the ruined plant. She'd been watering it just yesterday, had checked the temperature controls, had done everything right. But sometimes things died anyway. She was still kneeling there when Min-jae's voice cut through the silence behind her. "What happened?" She didn't turn around. "I don't know. I checked it yesterday and everything was fine. The stem must have been weaker than I thought." Heavy footsteps crossed the greenhouse floor. Min-jae crouched beside her, his expensive suit inches from the dirt, and carefully lifted one of the fallen petals. "My mother started this one from a cutting she brought from Seoul," he said quietly. She said it reminded her of home. Zorya's throat felt tight. "I'm sorry. I tried to—" "It's not your fault." He set the petal down gently. "Sometimes things break no matter how carefully you try to protect them." The words hung between them like something heavier than flowers. Is that what you think is going to happen tomorrow? Zorya asked. Everything breaks no matter how careful we are? Min-jae stood, brushing dirt from his knees. Tomorrow isn't about being careful. It's about making sure the right things break and the right things survive. And which category does my father fall into? The first one. What about me? He looked down at her, his dark eyes unreadable. I haven't decided yet. Then he walked away, leaving her alone with the dead orchid and the crushing weight of everything that was about to fall apart. Thursday night, Zorya barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face. The way he used to read to her before bed when she was little. The way he'd taught her to ride a bike in the park. The way he'd disappeared without explanation and left her to wonder if she'd somehow been the reason he left. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep completely and started pacing her room. There had to be a way out of this. Some angle she hadn't considered, some leverage she could use to make Min-jae change his mind. But every scenario ended the same way, with her father dead and Min-jae's cold logic intact. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Zorya opened the door to find Seo-yoon standing in the hallway, still fully dressed despite the late hour. Can't sleep? The older woman asked. Would you be able to sleep if someone was going to execute your father tomorrow? No, but I also wouldn't waste my last night trying to change the unchangeable. Zorya leaned against the doorframe, exhaustion making her bones ache. Did Min-jae send you to make sure I don't try to run? No, I came because you remind me of someone. Who? Min-jae's mother. She had the same look in her eyes you have right now, like she was trying to hold broken pieces together with sheer willpower. Zorya's chest tightened. Did it work? For a while. Then the cancer killed her anyway. Seo-yoon's expression softened slightly. My point is that some things are inevitable. Your father made choices that led to consequences. Min-jae made choices that led here, and now you're caught between them trying to stop something that's already in motion. So I should just give up. I'm saying you should focus on what you can actually control. Like what? Like what happens after tomorrow, assuming you survive it. The word sent ice through Zorya's veins. What do you mean, assuming? Seo-yoon's face went carefully blank. Nothing. Get some sleep, Zorya. Tomorrow will be difficult enough without exhaustion making it worse. She disappeared down the hallway before Zorya could ask what the hell she'd meant by that. Friday arrived like an execution date. Zorya woke early and found Min-jae already gone. Seo-yoon appeared with breakfast on a tray, food Zorya couldn't even look at without her stomach turning. Mr. Kang left instructions for you, Seo-yoon said. You're to stay in your room until 6 p.m., then I'll help you get ready. Where is he? Handling preparations. What kind of preparations? Seo-yoon's expression remained neutral. The kind that ensure tonight goes according to plan. She left before Zorya could press for details. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Zorya tried to read, tried to focus on anything other than the clock ticking toward midnight, but her brain kept circling back to the same terrible questions. What if her father didn't show up? What if he did show up and Min-jae killed him immediately? What if the money was gone and her father died for nothing? At 6 p.m. exactly, Seo-yoon returned with the black dress and a makeup kit that looked like it cost more than Zorya used to make in a month. Time to get ready, she said. Zorya's hands shook as she changed into the dress. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. Min-jae controlled everything down to the smallest detail. Seo-yoon worked quickly, applying makeup that made Zorya look older, sharper, more dangerous than she felt. When she finally looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The exhausted waitress who'd fallen asleep on a subway train 5 weeks ago had disappeared. In her place stood someone who looked like they belonged in Min-jae's world. Someone who could survive dangerous negotiations and blood-soaked empires. Someone who wasn't her at all. He's waiting downstairs, Seo-yoon said quietly. Zorya followed her through the mansion on legs that felt like they might give out at any second. They found Min-jae in the entrance hall, dressed entirely in black, suit, shirt, tie, like he was attending a funeral that hadn't happened yet. He looked up when she approached, and something flickered across his face before the cold mask dropped back into place. You look good, he said simply. I look like someone else. Tonight, that's exactly what you need to be. 3 black SUVs waited outside, engines already running. Min-jae's bodyguards, the same men who'd been on the subway that first night, stood at attention beside the vehicles. Silent, lethal, ready for whatever violence the night might bring. Min-jae gestured toward the middle SUV. You'll ride with me. Zorya climbed inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. Min-jae slid in beside her, and the door closed with a heavy finality that made her want to scream. The convoy started moving. What happens when we get there? Zorya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Your father will be waiting. I'll verify the money. Then we'll negotiate terms. You mean you'll kill him? If necessary. It's not necessary. You could just... Don't! Min-jae's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. Don't spend our last hour before this meeting trying to change my mind. It's exhausting for both of us. Zorya turned to look at him. Really look at him. In the dim light filtering through tinted windows, he looked almost human, tired, tense, like someone carrying weight that never got lighter. Can I ask you something? She said. You're going to anyway. Do you ever regret it? Building this empire? Becoming the kind of man who has to kill people to maintain power? Min-jae was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice so low she almost missed it. Every day. The admission shocked her. Then why? Because regret doesn't change reality. I made choices when I was younger that put me on this path. And now the only way to survive is to keep moving forward. There's no going back, no redemption, just survival. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. It's the truth. The convoy turned onto the highway, heading toward the waterfront, toward Miller's Bay Pier, toward whatever nightmare waited in the darkness. Zorya's phone, the one Min-jae had given her for emergencies only, buzzed in the small clutch Seo-yoon had provided. She pulled it out and her blood turned to ice. A text from an unknown number. I'm sorry, baby girl, for everything. I never meant for you to get caught in this mess. Whatever happens tonight, I need you to know I love you. Always have, always will. Dad? Her hands started shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. What is it? Min-jae asked sharply. She showed him the message. His expression darkened. He's trying to manipulate you, making himself sympathetic before the meeting. Or he's saying goodbye because he knows you're going to kill him. Same thing. Zorya wanted to throw the phone at his face, wanted to scream until her throat bled, but instead she just stared out the window as the city lights blurred past like stars dying in fast forward. Miller's Bay Pier looked exactly like the kind of place where bad things happened. Abandoned warehouses lined the waterfront. Broken streetlights cast everything in shadows. The smell of salt water and rotting fish hung heavy in the cold night air. And in the distance, Zorya could see a single figure standing at the end of the longest pier, silhouetted against black water. Her father. Min-jae's convoy stopped 50 yards back. The bodyguards spilled out first, moving into defensive positions with the practiced efficiency of men who'd done this 100 times before. Then Min-jae stepped out and extended his hand toward Zorya. She took it because she had no other choice. The walk toward the pier felt like walking toward her own execution. Each step echoed against concrete. Each breath came shorter than the last. And beside her, Min-jae moved with the calm certainty of someone who controlled everything except the outcome he actually wanted. They stopped 20 feet from her father. Marcus Holloway looked nothing like Zorya remembered. The confident accountant who used to wear cheap suits and complain about his boss had been replaced by someone broken. His hair had gone completely gray. His face was gaunt and lined with stress. His clothes hung off him like he'd lost significant weight. But his eyes were exactly the same. And when they landed on Zorya, they filled with tears. Baby girl, he whispered. Zorya's throat closed up completely. Dad, that's close enough, Min-jae said coldly. Let's keep this professional. Marcus's attention shifted to Min-jae, and something harder replaced the grief in his expression. You're really going to do this with my daughter, watching? Do what? Recover what you stole from me? Yes. I didn't steal anything. I took insurance against a monster. You took $17 million that didn't belong to you. Everything else is just justification. The two men stared at each other across 20 feet of concrete, and Zorya could feel the violence crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. "Where's the money?" Min-jun asked. Marcus pulled out a tablet and held it up. "Offshore account. Untraceable. I transfer it back to you. You let Zorya go. That was the deal." "No, the deal was you show up and we have a conversation about consequences." "Fuck your consequences. I did what I had to do to protect my family." "By abandoning them? By leaving your daughter to struggle alone while you hid like a coward?" Marcus flinched. "I left to keep them safe from you." "If you wanted them safe, you shouldn't have stolen from me in the first place." Zorya couldn't take it anymore. "Stop. Both of you just stop." She stepped forward, positioning herself between the two men who'd destroyed her life in different ways. "Dad, give him the money, please. Just give it to him and walk away." Marcus shook his head. "It's not that simple, baby. If I give him the money, he'll kill me anyway." "I won't let him. You don't have a choice." "Neither do you." Zorya's voice cracked. "You put me in this position. You stole from the most dangerous man in the city and then disappeared, leaving me to deal with the consequences. So now you're going to fix it, transfer the money, apologize. And maybe we all survive tonight." "He's already decided to kill me, Zorya. I can see it in his eyes." She turned to face Min-jun, her heart pounding. "Is that true?" Min-jun's expression remained perfectly controlled. "Transfer the money first, then we'll discuss terms." "See?" Marcus's laugh was bitter. "He can't even promise to let me live." "Because you don't deserve promises," Min-jun said coldly. "You deserve exactly what you gave me 5 years ago. Betrayal." Everything happened too fast after that. Marcus moved his hand toward his jacket pocket. Min-jun's bodyguards immediately drew weapons. Zorya screamed for everyone to stop, and then Marcus pulled out a gun. Small, black, shaking in his unsteady grip. He pointed it directly at Min-jun. "Nobody moves," Marcus said, his voice cracking, "or I put a bullet through the bastard's skull." Time seemed to freeze. 6 bodyguards had weapons trained on Marcus. Min-jun stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable. And Zorya felt like her entire world was collapsing into a single, terrible moment. "Dad, put the gun down," she whispered. "I can't. If I put it down, he kills me." "If you don't put it down, his men kill you." "Then I die either way. Might as well take him with me." Min-jun's voice cut through the chaos with terrifying calm. "You won't pull that trigger. You sure about that?" "Yes. Because if you kill me, my organization will hunt down everyone you've ever cared about. Your ex-wife, your daughter, every person whose name appears in your phone records for the last 5 years. They'll die slowly, painfully, and it will be your fault." Marcus's hand shook harder. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Min-jun took a step forward. "Pull the trigger and find out." "Don't!" Zorya grabbed Min-jun's arm, trying to stop him from walking into a bullet. "Please, don't do this." But Min-jun kept moving forward, his eyes locked on Marcus. "You wanted to protect your family, Marcus? Then put the gun down and transfer the money. That's the only way Zorya survives tonight." "She survives if you die." "No, she dies 30 seconds after I do. Because the men standing behind me have orders to kill everyone here if something happens to me, including her." The words hit Zorya like a physical blow. "You're lying." "I'm not." Min-jun still hadn't looked away from Marcus. "Those are standard protocols. If I'm killed during a negotiation, everyone present is eliminated to prevent witnesses and retaliation." "That's insane. That's survival." Marcus's gun hand dropped slightly, uncertainty replacing anger. "You'd kill your own leverage?" "She stops being leverage the moment I'm dead. She becomes a liability, and I don't leave liabilities behind to testify." Zorya's vision blurred with tears. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. But the cold certainty in Min-jun's voice told her it was exactly as real as it sounded. "So what now?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking. "I transfer the money and you kill me anyway?" "No, you transfer the money and I let you walk away." The offer shocked everyone, including Min-jun's bodyguards, who exchanged confused glances. "Why would you do that?" Marcus whispered. Min-jun's expression didn't change, but when he spoke, Zorya heard something underneath the cold control. Something that sounded almost like exhaustion. "Because I'm tired. Tired of hunting you. Tired of this entire situation. You give me back what you stole, you disappear permanently, and we both move on with our lives. And Zorya goes free. Zorya's breath caught. What? Min-jae finally looked at her, and something in his dark eyes made her chest ache. This was always about recovering the money. Once I have it, there's no reason to keep you. You said... I said a lot of things. I was wrong. The admission hung in the freezing air like something fragile and impossible. Marcus lowered the gun completely, his face crumpling. I don't believe you. I don't care if you believe me. Transfer the money or watch your daughter die. Those are your options. For 10 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. Then Marcus pulled out the tablet again with shaking hands and started entering information. Routing numbers, he muttered. Account verification, security protocols. Min-jae pulled out his own phone, watching numbers cascade across the screen. Waiting, confirming. Finally, he nodded. It's done. All 17 million accounted for. Marcus looked like he might collapse. So we're done? Just like that? Just like that. Min-jae gestured to his men. Let him leave. The bodyguards parted, creating a path toward the parking lot. Marcus started walking, then stopped and looked back at Zorya one more time. I'm sorry, he said, tears streaming down his face. For everything. For leaving. For stealing. For putting you in danger. I'm so goddamn sorry, baby girl. Zorya couldn't speak, could barely breathe. She just nodded. And then her father disappeared into the darkness, leaving her standing beside the most dangerous man in the city under a sky full of dying stars. The ride back to Min-jae's estate happened in complete silence. Zorya sat pressed against the car door, her mind spinning through everything that had just happened. Her father was alive. The money was returned. Min-jae had let him go. And apparently, she was free. The word felt meaningless, foreign, like something that belonged to a different version of reality. They arrived back at the mansion around 2 in the morning. The bodyguards disappeared to wherever they went when they weren't actively protecting Min-jae. Seo-yun was nowhere to be seen. And Zorya found herself standing alone in the entrance hall with the man who'd held her prisoner for 5 weeks. You should pack, Min-jae said quietly. I'll have someone drive you home in the morning. Zorya stared at him. Just like that? Just like that. I don't understand. You said I was leverage. I said a lot of things that turned out to be more complicated than I planned. What's that supposed to mean? Min-jae's jaw tightened. It means this arrangement served its purpose. Your father returned the money. You're no longer useful to me, so you're free to go. The word should have been a relief. Instead, they felt like rejection. Zorya took a step closer. Is that really what you want? For me to leave? What I want doesn't matter. Answer the question. Min-jae finally met her eyes, and Zorya saw something there that made her breath catch. Pain, conflict, something that looked dangerously close to longing. You should go, Zorya, before this becomes more complicated than it already is. More complicated than kidnapping? Than holding me prisoner for 5 weeks? Than making me... She stopped herself, but Min-jae finished the thought anyway. Then making you feel something for your captor? Is that what you were going to say? The question hung between them like an exposed nerve. I don't know what I feel, Zorya whispered. Then go home and figure it out somewhere that isn't here. Somewhere safe. What if I don't want safe? Min-jae's expression hardened. You don't know what you're saying, don't I? Zorya moved closer until only inches separated them. You think I haven't noticed the way you look at me? The way you changed everything about how you operate just to keep me comfortable? You let my father go tonight, Min-jae, the man who stole millions from you, the man you spent 5 years hunting, and you let him walk away. Because I got the money back. Bullshit. You let him go because killing him would have hurt me, and somewhere along the way that started mattering to you more than revenge. Min-jae's hands clenched into fists at his sides. You're wrong. Prove it. Tell me to leave and actually mean it. Look me in the eye and tell me you don't feel anything. For a long moment, Min-jae just stood there, his breathing harsh and uneven. Then he spoke, his voice so low Zorya almost missed it. I can't. The admission shattered something between them. Then stop pushing me away, Zorya said, her own voice breaking. Stop pretending this is simple when it's the most complicated thing either of us has ever felt. You don't understand what you're asking for. Then explain it to me. Min-jae's control finally cracked. He grabbed her arms, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make his point. You're asking to stay in a world that will destroy you. A world where people die violently and loyalty is bought with fear. A world where loving someone makes them a target for every enemy I've ever made. I know what world you live in. I've been living in it for 5 weeks. Protected, sheltered. I kept you separate from the worst of it. But if you stay, if you choose this, you'll see things that will give you nightmares for the rest of your life. Maybe, or maybe I'm stronger than you think. Min-jae's grip loosened slightly. Why would you want this? You could go home, go back to your normal life, forget any of this ever happened. Because my normal life was barely surviving. Working myself to death for minimum wage and tips. Coming home to an empty apartment, feeling invisible every single day. She reached up and placed her hand against his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing beneath expensive fabric. You made me feel seen, Min-jae. Even when you were holding me prisoner, even when everything was terrible, you saw me in a way nobody else ever has. That's not enough. It is for me. Min-jae stared down at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Then he did something Zorya never expected. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle, wasn't soft or romantic or any of the things first kisses were supposed to be. It was desperate and hungry and full of 5 weeks of tension that had finally found an outlet. Zorya kissed him back like she was drowning and he was oxygen. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Min-jae rested his forehead against hers. This is a mistake, he whispered. Probably. You should still leave. I'm not going to. Zorya, I'm staying. Unless you physically throw me out, I'm staying. Min-jae pulled back enough to look at her properly, and in his dark eyes, Zorya saw the exact moment he stopped fighting. You're going to regret this, he said. Maybe, but I'd regret leaving more. He kissed her again, slower this time, like he was memorizing the taste of a decision that would change everything. When he finally pulled away, his voice was rough. If you stay, there are rules. Of course there are. This world has enemies, people who would hurt you to hurt me. You'll need protection, training, you'll need to... I'll do whatever it takes. Min-jae's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You have no idea what you're agreeing to. Then show me. Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. You're insane. Probably, but so are you for letting me stay. He didn't deny it. Instead, Min-jae took her hand and led her deeper into the mansion. Not toward her room, toward his. Toward a future neither of them had planned for and both of them were choosing anyway. And somewhere in the darkness outside, Marcus Holloway disappeared into a life Zorya no longer wanted to follow. Because against all logic and reason, she'd chosen the monster over safety. And she wasn't sure if that made her brave or foolish or something dangerous in between. Min-jae's bedroom existed in a different reality than the rest of the mansion. No expensive artwork decorated the walls. No crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Just dark furniture, blackout curtains, and the kind of minimalist efficiency that suggested a man who didn't spend much time sleeping. The bed was made with military precision. A single book sat on the nightstand beside a gun that looked well-maintained and frequently used. Zorya stood in the doorway while Min-jae closed the door behind them, suddenly uncertain about every choice that had led to this moment. You can still change your mind, he said quietly. I know. Then why aren't you? She turned to face him, this dangerous man who'd kidnapped her and somehow become the only person who made her feel alive. Because I'm tired of being safe. Safe hasn't gotten me anything except exhaustion and invisibility. Min-jae crossed the room until he stood directly in front of her. His hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. If you stay, he said, his voice rough, everything changes. You can't go back to who you were before. Good. I don't want to be her anymore. He kissed her like that was the only answer he needed. And for the first time in 5 weeks, Zorya stopped thinking about consequences and just let herself feel. Morning came too early and too bright. Zorya woke up tangled in sheets that smelled like Min-jae's cologne, her body aching in ways that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with choices she couldn't take back. He was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with his back to her, staring at something on his phone. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice still rough with sleep. 6:30. He didn't turn around. "You should go back to your room before the staff sees you leaving mine." Reality crashed back in like cold water. "Why? Are you ashamed of me?" "No, I'm protecting your reputation in a household that runs on gossip and loyalty." Zorya sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. "I thought you said if I stayed, everything would change." "It will, but change takes time. And introducing you as anything more than a guest right now would create complications I'm not ready to deal with." The words stung more than they should have. "So what am I then? Your secret?" Min-jae finally turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "You're someone I'm trying very hard not to destroy. Give me time to figure out how to do that properly." He stood and grabbed a shirt from the closet, the conversation apparently over. Zorya watched him dress with the same precise efficiency he brought to everything, and wondered if last night had meant anything to him beyond satisfying curiosity about something he'd wanted. "Min-jae, go back to your room, Zorya. We'll talk later." The dismissal felt like being slapped. She gathered her dress from where it had been discarded on the floor and walked back to her own room wearing last night's clothes and this morning's regret. 3 days passed in strange limbo. Min-jae disappeared into his work, meetings that lasted hours. Phone calls conducted entirely in Korean behind closed doors. A parade of dangerous-looking men who arrived in expensive cars and left looking either satisfied or terrified depending on whatever conversation they'd had. Zorya barely saw him except at dinner, where he was polite and distant and completely different from the man who'd kissed her like she was oxygen. Seo-yoon noticed the tension immediately. "He's always like this after major negotiations," the older woman said on the fourth morning, finding Zorya alone in the greenhouse. "Distant, cold. It's how he processes stress. By ignoring the people around him? By compartmentalizing, separating business from everything else. It's a survival mechanism." Zorya viciously deadheaded a dying orchid bloom. "Well, it's a terrible mechanism. Perhaps, but it's kept him alive for 20 years in a world where most people don't survive 5. Is that supposed to make me feel better?" Seo-yoon gave her a look that was almost sympathetic. "No, it's supposed to help you understand what you signed up for." That evening, Zorya finally cornered Min-jae in his office. He looked up from his laptop when she walked in without knocking, his expression carefully neutral. "I'm busy." "I don't care." "Zorya, no. You don't get to sleep with me and then pretend I don't exist for 4 days. That's not how this works." Min-jae's jaw tightened. "I haven't been pretending you don't exist. I've been handling business that required my complete attention." "Is that what you tell yourself? That ignoring me is professional courtesy?" "I'm not ignoring you." "Then what do you call not speaking to me beyond basic pleasantries? Not looking at me during meals? Acting like that night never happened?" He stood abruptly, his control finally cracking. "That night was a mistake." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. It was a mistake. I let my judgment get compromised by proximity and attraction and 5 weeks of watching you exist in my space. But that doesn't change the fundamental problem. Which is that you don't belong in this world, Zorya. You belong somewhere safe, somewhere normal. Not standing in a crime boss's office demanding attention while I'm trying to prevent a gang war. You should have thought about that before you kissed me." "I know." Min-jae dragged his hand through his hair, exhaustion breaking through the ice. "I know. And I'm trying to fix it before this situation gets worse." "Worse how?" "Worse like people I do business with find out the most feared man in the city is sleeping with someone he was supposed to be using as leverage. Worse like my enemies realize you matter to me and decide to use that information to destroy everything I've built." Zorya's chest tightened. "Do I? Matter to you?" Min-jae looked at her like the question was torture. "Yes, and that's exactly the problem." "Why is caring about someone a problem?" "Because, in my world, caring makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability gets you killed." "So what are you suggesting? That we just pretend nothing happened? That I stay here as some kind of permanent guest you occasionally acknowledge?" "I'm suggesting you leave, before someone figures out that hurting you is the fastest way to hurt me." The suggestion felt like betrayal. "You told me I could stay." "I was wrong." "Bullshit. You're scared. You finally let someone close, and now you're panicking because you actually have something to lose. Min-jae's expression turned dangerous. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I've watched you for 5 weeks, Min-jae. I've seen how you operate, how you control everything, because losing control means showing weakness. But pushing me away isn't strength, it's cowardice. His hand slammed against the desk hard enough to make her jump. You want to know why I'm pushing you away? Fine. 2 days ago, one of my rivals sent me a message, a photograph of you in the greenhouse, taken from outside the estate walls with a telephoto lens. The message said, "She's pretty. Would be a shame if something happened to her." Ice flooded Zorya's veins. What? That's what happens when people in my world realize someone matters to me. They become targets. So yes, I'm pushing you away, because keeping you here is signing your death warrant. Then protect me. I can't protect you from everyone. Not all the time. Not when you're... He stopped himself. When I'm what? Min-jae's voice dropped to something raw and honest. When you're the only thing I care about more than survival. The admission hung between them like an exposed wound. Zorya crossed the room until she stood directly in front of his desk. Then teach me how to survive in your world. Don't send me away. Teach me. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. You're choosing fear over everything else. And for someone who built an empire on being fearless, that's pathetic. Min-jae's eyes flashed with anger. Get out! Make me. Zorya, I'm not leaving. Not the office, not the estate, not your life. So either accept that or physically throw me out. Those are your options. For a long moment, Min-jae just stared at her like she was a problem he couldn't solve. Then his phone rang, shattering the tension. He answered it, his expression darkening with whatever he was hearing. When? How many? I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and grabbed his jacket. I have to go. Don't leave the estate. Don't go near the windows. Don't do anything stupid. What's happening? One of my warehouses is on fire, either an accident or an attack. I won't know until I get there. He headed toward the door, then stopped and looked back at her. We're not done with this conversation, he said quietly. Then he was gone, leaving Zorya alone with racing thoughts, and the terrifying realization that she'd chosen a life where warehouses burning down was just another Thursday night. Dalnet, Min-jae didn't come home that night, or the next morning. By noon the following day, Zorya was pacing the mansion like a caged animal, while Seo-yoon tried unsuccessfully to get her to eat something. He's fine, Seo-yoon said for the 10th time. He handles situations like this regularly. Then why hasn't he called? Because he's busy managing whatever crisis emerged from the fire. Sit down, eat. Worrying won't help. But Zorya couldn't sit still. Something felt wrong. Off. Like the universe was holding its breath before everything fell apart. At 2 p.m., a black SUV finally pulled up to the front entrance. Zorya ran outside before anyone could stop her, expecting to see Min-jae emerge looking tired but unharmed. Instead, 2 of his bodyguards climbed out, followed by someone she recognized, her father. Marcus Holloway stood in the circular driveway looking even worse than he had at the pier. Blood crusted the side of his face. His clothes were torn, and his hands were zip-tied in front of him. What the hell is going on? Zorya demanded. One of the bodyguards, the tall one with the scar across his jaw, spoke in heavily accented English. Mr. Kong wants him inside, now. They dragged Marcus through the front door and into Min-jae's office. Zorya followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Min-jae was already there, standing behind his desk, with an expression that made Zorya's blood run cold. He wasn't wearing his usual suit. His clothes were covered in ash and soot. A bruise darkened his left cheekbone, and his eyes held the kind of rage that preceded violence. Sit him down, Min-jae said flatly. The bodyguard shoved Marcus into a chair. He looked up at Zorya, with tears streaming down his face. Baby girl, I'm so sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry. What's happening? Zorya looked between her father and Min-jae, panic rising. You let him go. We had a deal. The deal was predicated on your father actually leaving, Min-jae said, his voice like ice. Instead, he stayed in the city, and 3 days ago he sold information about my operations to my biggest competitor. The words didn't make sense. What? No, he wouldn't. The warehouse fire wasn't an accident, Zorya. It was arson. Coordinated with raids on 2 of my other holdings. Someone gave my enemies detailed information about security protocols, shipment schedules, and personnel rotations. Information only someone with inside access would have. Marcus was sobbing now. They said they'd kill you if I didn't cooperate. They said they'd hurt you worse than anything I could imagine. Who? Zorya's voice came out barely above a whisper. The Volkov organization, Russian mob. They've been trying to move into my territory for years. Min-jae's attention never left Marcus. They approached your father 2 weeks ago, offered him protection in exchange for intelligence. I didn't want to, Marcus said desperately. But they had photos of you, Zorya. Photos of you in this house. They knew where you were, what you meant to Min-jae. They said if I didn't help them, they'd take you instead. So instead of warning me, Min-jae said coldly, you betrayed me. Again. I was trying to protect my daughter. By feeding information to the people who want me dead? That's not protection. That's collaboration. Zorya felt like the floor had dropped out from underneath her. How bad is the damage? Min-jae's expression darkened further. 3 warehouses destroyed, 17 million in product gone, and 6 of my people dead. The number hit her like a hammer. Dead? Burned alive when the Volkovs locked the warehouse doors from outside. Your father's information made that possible. Marcus made a broken sound. I didn't know they were going to kill anyone. I swear I didn't know. You knew exactly what world you were operating in. You just chose your daughter's safety over everyone else's. Wouldn't you? Marcus looked up at Min-jae with desperate eyes. If someone threatened the person you loved most, wouldn't you do anything to protect them? Min-jae's jaw tightened. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he pulled a gun from his desk drawer. Zorya's breath stopped completely. Don't, she whispered. Please, don't. Min-jae checked the weapon with practiced efficiency. This is the 2nd time your father has betrayed me. There won't be a 3rd. He was trying to protect me. He got 6 of my people killed, people who had families, people who were loyal, people whose blood is on his hands because he made a choice. And you're going to make that same choice right now, Zorya said, moving to stand between Min-jae and her father. You're going to choose violence over everything else. Move, Zorya. No, this isn't your decision. It is when you're about to execute my father in front of me. Min-jae's expression was carved from stone. He murdered 6 people. That demands consequences. Then turn him over to the police. Let the legal system doesn't apply to my world. You know that. So what? You just get to decide who lives and dies? Yes, that's exactly what I get to decide. That's what running an organization like mine means. Marcus's voice broke through their argument. Zorya, move. Let him do what he needs to do. Shut up, Dad. Baby girl, this is my fault. I made the choices. I live with the consequences. I said, shut up. Zorya's voice cracked. She turned back to Min-jae, tears burning in her eyes. You told me you cared about me, that I mattered more than survival. Were you lying? No. Then prove it. Don't do this, please. You're asking me to show weakness in front of my men, to let a traitor walk away unpunished. If I do that, I lose credibility. I lose control, and everything I've built falls apart. Then let it fall apart. The words burst out of her before she could stop them. If maintaining your empire means murdering my father while I watch, then fuck your empire. Fuck all of it. The room went completely silent. Min-jae stared at her like she'd just stabbed him. You don't mean that, don't I? You keep telling me I don't belong in this world, that I'm too soft, too naive. Maybe you're right. Maybe I can't love someone who values power more than people. That's not fair. Fair? Zorya laughed bitterly. Nothing about this is fair. But I'm done pretending that what we have is worth your complete lack of humanity. She turned and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Min-jae's voice stopped her. Somewhere that isn't here. You were right. I don't belong in your world. And I don't want to anymore. Zorya. Shoot him. Or don't shoot him. I don't care anymore. But I'm not staying to watch you prove everything my father said about you is true. She left before he could respond. Behind her, she heard her father sob, heard the bodyguard shift uncomfortably, heard Min-jae's harsh breathing as he processed whatever decision he was about to make. And then she heard the gunshot. The sound echoed through the mansion like thunder. Zorya's legs gave out. She collapsed against the hallway wall, her entire body shaking with sobs she couldn't control. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Min-jae had chosen his empire over everything else. Footsteps approached from behind. Zorya didn't turn around, couldn't bear to see Min-jae's face right now. But when Seo-yun's hand touched her shoulder, gentle and grounding, Zorya realized it wasn't Min-jae at all. "Come with me," Seo-yun said quietly. "He killed him. He actually killed him." "No, he didn't." Zorya's head snapped up. "What?" "The shot hit the wall, 2 inches from your father's head. A warning, not an execution." Hope and confusion crashed through her system. Then why? Because Min-jae needed his men to believe he was willing to pull the trigger. Needed the message sent clearly. But in the end, he chose you over revenge. Zarya's hands were shaking so hard she could barely breathe. "Where's my father?" "Being transported to a safe house. He'll be kept under surveillance indefinitely, not free, but alive." "And Min-jae?" Seo-yun's expression turned sad. "In his office. Alone. Probably wondering if he just destroyed the first real thing he's cared about in years." Zorya pushed herself to her feet, her legs still unsteady. "I need to see him." "Are you sure that's wise?" "I don't care if it's wise. I need to—" Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Your father lives because of Kang Min-jae's weakness. That weakness will cost him everything he's built, and you'll watch it happen. Sleep well. Volkov." Ice flooded through her veins. "Seo-yun, I need you to see something." The older woman read the message, her expression darkening. "This needs to go to Min-jae immediately." They burst into his office without knocking. Min-jae was sitting behind his desk, with his head in his hands, the gun still on the desktop. He looked up when they entered, his expression hollow. "I didn't kill him," he said flatly. "If that's why you're here." "I know." Zorya held out her phone. "But we have a bigger problem." He read the message, and something terrifying replaced the exhaustion in his eyes. "When did you get this?" 30 seconds ago." Min-jae immediately started typing on his laptop, pulling up security feeds and communications logs. "They've been watching the house, been monitoring our phones. They know I let Marcus live." "What does that mean?" "It means the Volkovs now believe I'm compromised, weak, and they're going to use that perception to destroy everything I've built." He looked up at Zorya, his expression raw. "Starting with you." "What?" "The message isn't subtle. They're telling me that sparing your father was a mistake, that caring about you makes me vulnerable, and they're going to exploit that vulnerability until there's nothing left." Zorya's throat went tight. "So what do we do?" Min-jae stood, his entire demeanor shifting from exhausted to dangerous. "We prepare for war, because the Volkovs just declared it." He started issuing orders in rapid Korean to the bodyguards who'd appeared in the doorway. They scattered immediately, moving with urgent purpose. Then he turned back to Zorya. "I need you to understand something. What's about to happen will be violent, brutal, nothing like what you've seen before. And if you stay, you'll be right in the middle of it." "I'm not leaving." "Zorya, I'm not leaving you. Not now. Not when everything's falling apart." Min-jae's expression cracked. "I don't deserve that kind of loyalty." "Maybe not, but you're getting it anyway." He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. "I'm sorry," he whispered against her hair, "for pushing you away, for being too afraid to admit how much you've changed everything. I'm sorry too, for asking you to choose between me and your entire life. You didn't ask. I chose, and I'll keep choosing you even if it destroys me." The words should have been romantic. Instead, they felt like a death sentence. Because outside the mansion, Zorya could hear vehicles pulling up, urgent voices, the sound of weapons being prepared for whatever nightmare was coming. And somewhere in the city, the Volkov organization was preparing to prove that loving someone in Min-jae's world was the most dangerous mistake either of them could make. The mansion transformed into a fortress within 20 minutes. Armed men appeared from nowhere, positioning themselves at every entrance, every window, every vulnerable point in the estate's perimeter. Zorya watched from Min-jae's office window as vehicles formed protective barriers around the property. Heavy weaponry emerged from hidden storage. Communication equipment crackled with urgent Korean that she couldn't understand, but recognized as preparation for violence. Min-jae stood behind his desk, coordinating everything with cold precision, his phone pressed to his ear while he typed commands on his laptop. The exhausted man who'd held her minutes ago had disappeared completely, replaced by someone harder, more dangerous. This was the version of Kang Min-jae that terrified an entire city. He ended his call and looked at Zorya. Seo-yoon is going to take you to the safe room. What safe room? Underground, reinforced steel, separate ventilation system. If they breach the mansion, you'll be protected. I'm not hiding in a hole while you fight a war. You don't have a choice. Yes, I do, and I'm choosing to stay with you. Min-jae's jaw tightened. Zorya, this isn't a conversation. The Volkovs are coming. When they get here, this entire estate becomes a combat zone. I need you somewhere I don't have to worry about you getting killed. And I need to be somewhere I can help instead of sitting in the dark wondering if you're alive or dead. You can't help. You're not trained for this. You don't know how to… Then give me a gun and teach me. The request stopped him cold. Absolutely not. Why? Because I'm too soft, too civilian? Because putting a weapon in your hands when you've never fired one before is how you get yourself killed. Zorya moved closer, her voice dropping. I'm already a target, Min-jae. The Volkovs know who I am, know what I mean to you. Hiding me doesn't change that. At least if I'm armed, I have a chance if something goes wrong. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then he walked to a cabinet behind his desk and pulled out a handgun smaller than the one he'd threatened her father with. He checked the magazine, verified the safety, and held it out. This is a Glock 43, 9mm, 8 rounds. Point and squeeze, don't pull. Keep both eyes open. Aim for center mass. Zorya took the weapon, surprised by how heavy it felt in her hands. If someone comes at you, Min-jae continued, his voice hard, you don't hesitate. You don't negotiate. You shoot until they stop moving. Understand? She nodded, her throat tight. Say it. I understand. Good. He grabbed a shoulder holster from the same cabinet and helped her put it on, his movements professional despite the intimacy of adjusting straps across her body. Keep it concealed. Don't draw it unless you're ready to use it. And if things go bad, you run. You don't try to be a hero, you just run. What about you? I'll be handling the Volkovs. That's not an answer. Min-jae's hands paused on the holster straps. When he looked at her, something raw lived in his dark eyes. I've survived 20 years in this world by being willing to do things other people won't. Tonight won't be any different. Promise me you'll survive. I can't promise that. Then promise me you'll try. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. I'll try, for you. The moment shattered when one of his bodyguards burst through the door speaking rapid Korean. Min-jae's expression went ice cold. What? Zorya asked. They're here, 3 blocks away, moving fast. Well, the first explosion shook the entire mansion. Zorya stumbled against Min-jae's desk as the windows rattled, and somewhere outside alarms started screaming. Gunfire erupted immediately, sharp cracks that made her ears ring even from inside the office. Min-jae grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. Stay behind me. Move fast. They ran through corridors filling with armed men heading toward the battle. The mansion's security feed showed chaos outside. Black SUVs ramming through the front gates, men in tactical gear pouring out with automatic weapons, Min-jae's people returning fire from fortified positions. It looked like a war zone. Min-jae dragged her into a smaller office 2 floors down. Seo-yoon was already there with 3 other staff members, all of them armed and positioned near the windows. Keep her alive, Min-jae said in English, his eyes on Zorya. No matter what happens. Wait. Zorya reached for him, but he was already moving, disappearing back into the hallway where men were shouting orders, and the sound of gunfire kept getting closer. Seo-yoon pulled her away from the door. He knows what he's doing. That doesn't make this easier. Nothing about loving someone in this world is easy. You should have learned that by now. Another explosion rocked the building. Closer this time. Zorya could hear glass shattering somewhere above them. Smoke started seeping through the ventilation system. One of Seo-yoon's staff members, a young Korean man who couldn't have been older than 25, spoke urgently in his native language while checking his weapon. Seo-yoon's expression darkened. They've breached the east wing. Min-jae's people are holding the main staircase, but the Volkovs are pushing hard. How many? At least 30, maybe more. Zorya's stomach twisted. And how many people does Min-jae have? Here, 20, but he's called for reinforcements from other locations. They'll arrive in 10 minutes. That's a long time in a firefight. Yes, it is. The lights flickered, once, twice, then the entire mansion plunged into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in 3 seconds later, bathing everything in red that made the situation feel even more nightmarish. Zorya's hand instinctively went to the gun hidden under her jacket. Seo-yoon's phone buzzed. She read the message and cursed in Korean. The Volkovs cut the main power line. They're trying to disable our security systems. Will it work? We have backup generators, but yes, some systems will be compromised. Footsteps thundered past the office door. Zorya caught a glimpse of Min-jae moving with 4 of his men toward the east wing, all of them armed with weapons that looked military-grade. Then the hallway erupted in gunfire so loud Zorya's ears went numb. Seo-yoon shoved her to the floor behind a heavy desk just as bullets punched through the office door. Wood splintered, glass exploded. The young staff member who'd been standing near the window went down with a scream, blood blooming across his shoulder. "Stay down!" Seo-yoon shouted over the chaos. Zorya pressed herself against the floor, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was real. People were dying, and somewhere in the mansion, Min-jae was fighting for his life while she hid behind furniture. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it started. Silence pressed down like a physical weight, broken only by the young man's pained breathing and the distant sound of shouting in multiple languages. Seo-yoon checked the hallway, her own weapon drawn. Clear. For now. She helped the injured man apply pressure to his wound while giving orders to the other 2 staff members. Zorya watched, feeling completely useless, until Seo-yoon turned to her. "Can you help him? Keep pressure on the wound while I assess the situation." Zorya's hands were shaking, but she nodded. She moved to the young man's side and pressed her palms against the makeshift bandage Seo-yoon had created from torn fabric. Blood soaked through immediately, hot and sticky. The man looked up at her with frightened eyes and said something in Korean. "I don't understand," Zorya whispered. "I'm sorry." Seo-yoon translated without looking away from the doorway. "He's asking if Mr. Kong is winning." "What do I tell him?" "Tell him yes, even if you don't believe it. He needs hope more than truth right now." Zorya forced herself to meet the young man's eyes. "Yes, he's winning." She had no idea if that was true. 15 minutes passed like 15 hours. The gunfire continued sporadically throughout the mansion, sometimes close, sometimes distant, sometimes punctuated by explosions that shook the walls and sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Zorya stayed with the injured man, keeping pressure on his wound while Seo-yoon coordinated with other parts of the security team via encrypted messages on her phone. Then Seo-yoon's expression changed. Min-jae's people have pushed the Volkovs back to the entrance hall. They're trying to extract, but Min-jae has them pinned. Is he okay? He's alive, that's all the update says. That's not good enough. It's all we have. Zorya's phone buzzed, a text from Min-jae. Stay where you are. Almost finished. Relief crashed through her so hard she almost cried. But before she could respond, Seo-yoon's phone rang. The older woman answered in Korean, then her face went pale. When? How many? She ended the call and looked at Zorya with an expression that made her blood run cold. What's wrong? That was our perimeter team. Another wave of Volkov soldiers just arrived. 10 vehicles. At least 40 men. They're surrounding the estate. But Min-jae said, the first group was a distraction. This is the real assault. The mansion's emergency speakers crackled to life, with Min-jae's voice speaking in Korean, then switching to English. All personnel fall back to secondary defensive positions. This is not a drill. Repeat, fall back to secondary positions. Protect the principal and priority assets at all costs. Seo-yoon grabbed Zorya's arm. We need to move now. Move where? The safe room. This time you don't get a choice. They ran through smoke-filled hallways past rooms that had been turned into wreckage. Bodies lay sprawled in positions that suggested violence had found them mid-movement. Some wore Min-jae's colors. Some wore tactical gear that marked them as Volkov soldiers. Zorya tried not to look at their faces. Seo-yoon led them down a staircase Zorya had never seen before, hidden behind what looked like a normal wall panel. They descended into darkness lit only by emergency lighting until they reached a heavy steel door. Seo-yoon entered a code. The door hissed open, revealing a room that looked like something from a military bunker. Reinforced walls, communications equipment, stockpiled supplies, and in the corner enough weapons to outfit a small army. "Inside," Seo-yoon ordered. Zorya stepped through the threshold, then turned as Seo-yoon started to close the door from the outside. "Wait, aren't you coming? Someone needs to help Min-jae coordinate the defense. That someone is me. You can't just leave me here." "I can and I will. Lock this door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except Min-jae or me. The code to unlock from inside is on that panel." She pointed to a keypad near the door. "If we don't come back in 6 hours, there's a tunnel that leads to a safe house 3 miles from here. Coordinates are in the computer." "Seo-yoon, take care of him, Zorya. If he survives this, he's going to need someone who reminds him why surviving matters." Then the door slammed shut, and Zorya was alone in the silence of the safe room, while somewhere above her, the man she'd chosen over safety was fighting for his life. 20 minutes of silence felt like dying slowly. Zorya paced the safe room, checking the security feeds displayed on monitors along one wall. The cameras showed carnage. The Volkovs had breached the mansion's outer defenses and were pushing toward the central structure where Min-jae had concentrated his forces. The firefight looked apocalyptic. Then one of the monitors went dark. Then another. Someone was systematically destroying the security cameras. Zorya's phone rang, making her jump. Min-jae's name on the screen. She answered immediately. "Are you okay?" "For now." His voice was rough, punctuated by distant gunfire. "Listen carefully. The Volkovs brought more people than we anticipated. We're holding them off, but barely. If something happens to me, don't talk like that. If something happens to me," he continued, ignoring her, "Seo-yoon will get you out through the tunnel. There's money, new identity documents, everything you need to disappear." "I'm not disappearing without you." "Zorya, no. We survive this together or not at all." She heard him exhale, the sound carrying exhaustion and something that might have been affection. "You're the most stubborn person I've ever met. I learned from the best." Gunfire erupted so close to Min-jae's position that Zorya could hear it clearly through the phone. He cursed in Korean. "I have to go. Stay in the safe room. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you stay there until—" The line went dead. Zorya stared at her phone, panic clawing at her chest. She tried calling back. No answer. Tried again. Nothing. The monitors showed the Volkovs pushing deeper into the mansion. Min-jae's forces were being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. And somewhere in that chaos, the man she loved was fighting a battle he might not win. Zorya made a decision that would have horrified Min-jae. She unlocked the safe room door. The tunnel Seo-yoon had mentioned was clearly marked, leading away from the danger, away from Min-jae, away from everything that mattered. Zorya went the opposite direction. She moved through the basement corridors with the Glock drawn, following the sound of gunfire like a beacon. Every survival instinct screamed at her to turn back, to run, to save herself. But she couldn't leave Min-jae to face this alone. The stairs leading up to the main floor were slick with blood. Zorya climbed carefully, trying not to slip, trying not to think about whose blood she was walking through. She emerged into a hallway filled with smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Bodies lay everywhere. Most weren't moving. A few were making sounds that would haunt her nightmares for years. Zorya forced herself to keep moving. She found Min-jae in what used to be the main library. He was backed into a corner with 3 of his men, all of them firing at Volkov soldiers who had them pinned from multiple directions. Min-jae's suit was torn and blood-stained. A cut above his eyebrow bled down the side of his face. But his hands were steady and his eyes were focused with the kind of lethal clarity that came from years of surviving impossible situations. He didn't see Zorya until she shot the Volkov soldier who'd been flanking his position. The man went down hard and Min-jae's head snapped toward her with an expression of pure horror. What the fuck are you doing here? Saving your life, apparently. I told you to stay in the safe room, and I ignored you. Move! She fired twice more, giving Min-jae and his men the seconds they needed to change positions. One of Min-jae's bodyguards, the tall one with the scar, nodded at her with something that looked like respect before turning back to lay down covering fire. Min-jae grabbed Zorya's arm and pulled her behind an overturned bookshelf. You could have been killed. So could you. I'm trained for this. I'm here. Deal with it. He looked at her like he wanted to strangle her and kiss her simultaneously. Then more Volkov soldiers poured through the doorway, and the moment for argument passed. The next 5 minutes were pure chaos. Zorya fired until her magazine was empty, then fumbled with the reload Min-jae had shown her what felt like a lifetime ago. Her hand shook so badly she almost dropped the fresh magazine, but she got it locked in place and kept firing because stopping meant dying. Min-jae fought like something inhuman, every movement precise, every shot finding its target. He moved through the firefight with the confidence of someone who'd been preparing for this moment his entire life. And slowly, impossibly, the tide started to turn. Min-jae's reinforcements arrived with the sound of vehicles crashing through what remained of the estate's gates. Fresh soldiers poured into the mansion, pushing back the Volkov assault with overwhelming force. The Volkov soldiers who weren't dead started retreating, but their leader, a massive Russian man with a shaved head and cold blue eyes, wasn't running. He stood in the library doorway with a weapon trained directly on Min-jae. You should have died like a king, the Russian said, his English heavily accented. Instead, you die like a fool who fell in love. He squeezed the trigger. Time seemed to slow down. Zorya saw the Russian's finger move, saw Min-jae start to turn, saw the inevitability of what was about to happen, and she moved without thinking. She threw herself in front of Min-jae just as the gun fired. The impact felt like being hit by a truck. Pain exploded through her left side, white-hot and all-consuming. She hit the floor hard, her vision blurring. Somewhere above her, Min-jae was screaming her name. More gunfire. The Russian went down, his chest torn apart by bullets from Min-jae's weapon. Other Volkov soldiers fell as Min-jae's reinforcements swept through the room with ruthless efficiency. Then Min-jae was on the floor beside her, his hands pressing against the wound in her side, his face twisted with panic that looked completely foreign on someone usually so controlled. Stay with me, he said urgently. Zorya, stay with me. She tried to speak, but her lungs weren't cooperating. Blood filled her mouth, tasting like copper and terror. Get a medic, Min-jae shouted in English, then Korean, his voice breaking. Get a fucking medic now. Zorya's vision was fading at the edges, darkness creeping in like a tide. She could hear Min-jae talking to her, begging her to hold on, promising things she couldn't quite process. The last thing she saw before everything went black was his face above hers, devastated and desperate and more human than she'd ever seen him. Then nothing. Consciousness returned in fragments. Beeping machines, antiseptic smell, soft sheets against her skin, pain that had been reduced to a dull ache by whatever drugs were flowing through her system. Zorya's eyes opened slowly, adjusting to harsh fluorescent lighting. She was in a hospital room, private from the look of it. Expensive equipment surrounded her bed. An IV drip fed clear liquid into her arm. And sitting in a chair beside her, looking like he hadn't slept in days, was Min-jae. He was staring at his hands, not moving, not speaking, just sitting there like a statue carved from exhaustion and guilt. Hey, Zorya croaked, her voice rough. His head snapped up so fast she heard his neck crack. For a moment, he just stared at her like he didn't believe she was real. Then he was on his feet, leaning over her bed with an expression that broke her heart. You're awake. Apparently, she tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her side. How long was I out? 36 hours. The bullet missed your vital organs, but you lost a lot of blood. They had to operate twice to stop the internal bleeding. His voice was flat, clinical, like he was reporting facts about someone else's trauma. Min-jae, you almost died. The words came out harsh, angry. You threw yourself in front of a bullet meant for me and almost died. But I didn't. You could have, easily, and it would have been my fault. Zorya reached for his hand. He pulled away like her touch burned. Don't, he said quietly. Don't try to comfort me. Not after what I put you through. You didn't put me through anything. I made my own choices. Choices you wouldn't have had to make if I hadn't dragged you into my world. I chose to stay in your world, remember? Min-jae's control finally cracked. And look what it got you. A bullet in your side and trauma you'll carry for the rest of your life. This is exactly why I tried to push you away. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. I'm alive. You're alive. We won. At what cost? He gestured at her hospital bed, at the machines keeping her monitored. 6 of my people are dead, Zorya. 20 more injured. The mansion is half destroyed, and the woman I love almost died protecting me. That's not winning. That's barely surviving. The confession, the casual way he said the woman I love, should have been romantic. Instead, it sounded like an admission of failure. What happens now? Zorya asked quietly. Now you recover, and when you're strong enough, I arrange transport somewhere safe, somewhere far from me in this life. The words hit her harder than the bullet had. You're sending me away. I'm setting you free, like I should have done the night at the pier. And if I don't want to be set free? Min-jae finally looked at her directly, and the pain in his eyes was devastating. Then you're more foolish than I thought, because staying with me means more nights like this, more violence, more watching people die. Eventually it means watching me die, or dying yourself. Everyone dies eventually. Not like we do. Zorya's throat felt tight. So that's it? You're making this decision for both of us? I'm making the decision I should have made before I let you into my bed and my life. You're a coward. The accusation made him flinch. Maybe. But I'm a coward who's keeping you alive. By pushing me away, that's not protection. That's abandonment. It's survival. For both of us. I don't believe you actually want this. Min-jae's expression hardened. What I want doesn't matter. What matters is keeping you alive long enough to have a real life. A normal life. Something I can never give you. I don't want normal. I want you. You want the version of me that held you in the greenhouse and pretended to be human. That's not who I am. The man in the library with blood on his hands and bodies at his feet, that's who I am. That's who I'll always be. Tears burned behind Zorya's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Fine. If that's what you want, then go. Walk away. Prove that everything you said about caring about me was just another manipulation. Zorya, get out. Let me explain. Get out! Her voice cracked. If you're going to abandon me, at least have the decency to do it quickly instead of dragging this out. Min-jae stood there for a long moment, looking like he wanted to say something that might fix the destruction between them. But instead he just turned and walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold. Seo-yoon will handle your discharge and travel arrangements. You'll have money, protection, everything you need. Everything except you. He didn't respond to that, just walked out and closed the door behind him with a finality that felt like the end of everything. Zorya lay in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that confirmed she was alive while feeling completely hollow inside. She'd survived a bullet. But losing Min-jae hurt infinitely worse. 3 weeks passed in a fog of physical therapy and hollow routine. Zorya recovered in a private facility that looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital. The doctors were excellent, the staff attentive. Everything was paid for by accounts she'd never seen and didn't want to think about. Min-jae never visited. Seo-yoon came twice. Once to bring clothing and personal items. Once to deliver an envelope containing a new passport, a bank account number with enough money to live comfortably for years, and a handwritten note that simply said, "I'm sorry." Zorya had thrown the note away without reading it a second time. Her mother visited once, confusion and concern written all over her face as she asked questions Zorya couldn't answer. Where had she been? Why was she in the hospital? Who was paying for all of this? Zorya had lied through her teeth. A car accident, an anonymous benefactor. Everything was fine. Her mother hadn't believed a word but loved her enough not to push. On the 22nd day after the shooting, the doctors cleared Zorya for discharge. The wound had healed cleanly. No permanent damage beyond a scar that would remind her forever of the night she'd chosen love over survival. Seo-yoon arrived with a car to take her anywhere she wanted to go. "Where to?" the older woman asked as Zorya settled into the back seat. I don't know. You could go home, back to your apartment, your old life. That life doesn't exist anymore. Then you could leave the city, start fresh somewhere new, use the resources Min-jae provided to build something better. Zorya stared out the window at streets she'd walked 1,000 times before everything changed. What does he want me to do? Does it matter? Yes. Seo-yoon was quiet for a moment. He wants you to disappear, to be safe, to forget him and everything that happened. And what do you think I should do? I think you should decide what you want instead of living your life based on what other people think is best for you. The words settled into Zorya's chest like stones. What did she want? A month ago, the answer would have been simple. Safety, stability, a normal life without bullets and blood and men who ruled empires built on fear. But that person felt like a stranger now. Take me to Min-jae, Zorya said quietly. Seo-yoon met her eyes in the rearview mirror. Are you sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. The older woman's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Then she changed directions, driving toward the parts of the city where glass towers met old industrial buildings and money bought silence. They arrived at a building Zorya had never seen before. Sleek, modern, the kind of place that screamed wealth without advertising it. Seo-yoon led her through a lobby where security nodded respectfully, into an elevator that required a key card, up to a penthouse floor that overlooked the entire city. He's in there, Seo-yoon said, gesturing to double doors at the end of the hallway. But I should warn you, he's not the same person you knew before. None of us are. Zorya walked to the doors alone, raised her hand to knock, hesitated. What if Min-jae refused to see her? What if he'd meant everything he said in the hospital? What if she was about to humiliate herself by chasing after someone who genuinely wanted her gone? She knocked anyway. Silence. Then footsteps approaching from inside. The door opened. Min-jae stood there looking like he'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. His hair was longer, unkempt. Dark circles hollowed his eyes. He'd lost weight, his expensive clothes hanging looser than they should. But his eyes still held that same intensity that had terrified and fascinated her from the beginning. He stared at her like she was a ghost. Zorya, can I come in? For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then he stepped back, opening the door wider. The penthouse was immaculate but impersonal. Expensive furniture that looked unused. Windows offering views that nobody seemed to appreciate. It felt like a place someone existed in rather than lived in. You're walking better, Min-jae said, his voice carefully neutral. The wound healed well? Well enough. Good, that's good. Awkward silence pressed between them like a living thing. I got your note, Zorya said finally. And the money, and the passport. You should use them. Get out of this city. Start over somewhere clean. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. It matters to me. Min-jae turned away, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Why are you here, Zorya? The doctors cleared you. Seo-yoon provided everything you need. There's no reason for us to see each other again. Except I'm in love with you. The confession hung in the air like something fragile and dangerous. Min-jae's shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. You're in love with someone who doesn't exist. Some version of me you created in your head during 5 weeks of captivity. That's not real. Isn't it? Because the man I fell in love with showed me his greenhouse and talked about his mother, spared my father even when it compromised his authority, held me like I was the only thing that mattered while his entire world burned down around him. That man exists, Min-jae. I've seen him. You've seen what I let you see. Moments of weakness in an otherwise brutal existence. I've also seen you covered in blood, fighting for survival, making impossible decisions, and I fell in love with that version too. He finally turned to face her, his expression hard. You fell in love with danger, with excitement, with the thrill of being wanted by someone powerful. That's not the same as loving who I actually am. Don't tell me what I feel, then explain it to me. Explain how you can love someone who got you shot, who dragged you into a war you had no part in, who put a target on your back that will never completely disappear. Zorya moved closer, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I love you because you saw me when I was invisible. Because you made me feel like I mattered in a world that had convinced me I didn't. Because you chose me over revenge and power and everything you'd built your entire life around. And look what it cost you. It cost me a bullet wound that healed. You know what it gave me? A reason to wake up feeling something other than exhausted. Min-jae's control cracked slightly. You could have died. But I didn't. Next time you might. There won't be a next time. The Volkovs are finished. You told me yourself. After that assault failed, their organization collapsed. The survivors scattered. You won. Winning doesn't mean the danger disappears. There's always another enemy, another threat, another reason why loving you is the most selfish thing I've ever done. Then be selfish. Choose me anyway. I can't. Why not? Because I don't deserve you. The words burst out of him like a dam breaking. I kidnapped you, held you prisoner, used you as leverage against your own father. I'm the reason you got shot, the reason you have nightmares, the reason your hands shake when you hear loud noises. You deserve someone better, someone clean. I don't want clean. I want real. This isn't some romantic story where the monster gets redeemed by love, Zorya. This is real life. And in real life, people like me destroy everything we touch. Zorya closed the distance between them until she stood inches away. Then destroy me. If that's what you think is inevitable, then stop fighting it and just destroy me. That's not funny. I'm not joking. You keep pushing me away to protect me from some hypothetical future disaster. But the real disaster is watching you torture yourself over something that already happened and turned out fine. Min-jae's jaw clenched. It's not fine. Nothing about this is fine. Maybe not, but it's what we have. And I'd rather have this complicated, messy, dangerous thing with you than safe and empty with someone else. You don't know what you're asking for. I know exactly what I'm asking for. I'm asking you to stop being a coward and admit that you want this as much as I do. The word coward hit him like a slap. Something shifted in his expression, anger mixing with something that looked almost like relief. You think I don't want this? His voice dropped to something rough and raw. You think I haven't spent 3 weeks trying to convince myself that sending you away was the right choice? That I haven't looked at my phone 100 times wanting to call you but stopping myself because keeping you safe matters more than what I want? Then stop trying to be noble and just be honest. Honest? You want honest? Min-jae grabbed her face between his hands, not roughly, but with desperate intensity. I love you so much it terrifies me. You walked into my life by accident and somehow became the only thing that makes any of this bearable. And that scares the hell out of me because everyone I've ever cared about has ended up dead or destroyed. I'm still here, still alive, still choosing you. For now. But eventually we all die, Min-jae. That's not unique to your world. At least if I'm with you, I die having lived instead of just survived. He stared at her like she was a puzzle he'd been trying to solve for years and just now found the missing piece. Then he kissed her with 3 weeks of loneliness and fear and desperate hope compressed into a single moment. Zorya kissed him back like she was claiming something that had always belonged to her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Min-jae rested his forehead against hers. This is insane. Probably. You're going to regret it. Maybe, but I'll regret leaving more. A sound that might have been a laugh escaped him. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met. I learned from the best. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. If you stay, really stay, there are conditions. Of course there are. You learn self-defense, proper training, not just basic gun safety. You understand how my world works so you can navigate it without getting killed. Okay? And you tell me immediately if you change your mind, if this becomes too much, if you want out. No guilt, no judgment. You just tell me, and I'll make it happen. What if I never want out? Then I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. Zorya looked up at him, this dangerous man who'd somehow become her safe place. You already do. He kissed her again, slower this time, like he was memorizing the taste of a future he'd convinced himself he couldn't have. And for the first time in 3 weeks, Zorya felt like she could actually breathe. 6 months later, everything had changed and nothing had changed. Zorya moved into the penthouse officially. Not as a prisoner or a guest, but as someone who belonged there. Her clothes hung in Min-jae's closet. Her books filled the empty shelves. Her presence transformed the sterile space into something that felt almost like home. She learned to shoot properly, spent hours at a private range with instructors who taught her not just how to fire a weapon, but how to think tactically, how to assess threats, how to move through danger without freezing. She learned Korean, slowly and imperfectly, but enough to understand conversations happening around her, enough to participate in Min-jae's world instead of just existing adjacent to it. She met the people who ran his organization, hard men and women who'd built their lives on loyalty and violence. They respected her not because of who she was to Min-jae, but because she'd taken a bullet meant for him and survived. That earned currency in their world that no amount of money could buy. The mansion was rebuilt, slowly, carefully, with security measures that made the previous system look amateur. Min-jae moved his primary operations there, and Zorya went with him. The greenhouse was restored to its former glory, the orchids replanted, including cuttings from the white orchid his mother had started, which somehow survived the assault and bloomed more beautifully than before. Zorya's mother eventually learned the truth. Not all of it, but enough to understand that her daughter had chosen a life that existed outside normal boundaries. She didn't approve, but she loved Zorya enough to accept it. Marcus Holloway remained under surveillance at a safe house 2 states away. He and Zorya spoke occasionally on monitored calls. The conversations were awkward and painful and slowly building towards something that might eventually look like forgiveness. She visited him once, with Min-jae's approval, and cried when her father apologized for choices that had destroyed years neither of them could get back. The Volkov organization never recovered from their failed assault. The survivors were absorbed by other groups or fled the city entirely. Min-jae's reputation emerged stronger, a man who'd survived an all-out attack and crushed his enemies completely. But he changed too, subtly, almost imperceptibly to anyone who didn't know him well. He smiled more, laughed occasionally, spent less time buried in work and more time in the greenhouse with Zorya, teaching her about cultivation and patience and the strange beauty of things that required careful attention to thrive. He was still dangerous, still ruthless when the situation demanded it, still the most feared man in the city. But he was also someone who woke Zorya up at midnight to watch lightning storms from the penthouse windows. Someone who learned to cook her favorite meal even though he had staff who could do it better. Someone who held her during nightmares and whispered promises that surviving was worth it if they did it together. Bogti. The proposal happened on a Tuesday morning in the greenhouse. No dramatic setup, no elaborate planning. Just Min-jae and Zorya working side by side among the orchids like they'd done 100 times before. He was checking the humidity levels on a particularly finicky purple specimen when he spoke without looking at her. "Marry me." Zorya's hand stilled on the plant she'd been watering. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, still focused on his task like he'd asked her to pass him a tool instead of committing to forever. That's possibly the least romantic proposal in history. "I know, but I mean it." He finally looked at her, and Zorya saw something in his eyes that made her chest ache. Vulnerability, hope, fear that she might say no. "Why?" she asked.
But that's...
"Because 6 months ago, you threw yourself in front of a bullet meant for me. And every day since then, you've chosen to stay even when leaving would be easier. Because you see the worst parts of who I am and love me anyway. Because waking up next to you is the only time I don't feel like I'm constantly preparing for the next war." He set down the humidity gauge and moved closer. "I can't promise you normal, can't promise safety, can't even promise we'll survive the next crisis that comes for us. But I can promise that whatever time we have, I'll spend it trying to be worth the choice you made to stay." Zorya's throat felt tight. "You're doing better with the romantic angle now. Is that a yes?" "That depends. Do I get a ring, or are we keeping this practical too?" Min-jae reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside sat a ring that took Zorya's breath away. A simple band with a single diamond that caught the greenhouse light and scattered it into rainbows. "I had it made 3 months ago," he admitted. "Been carrying it around waiting for the right moment. Then I realized there's no right moment for people like us. There's just now." Zorya took the ring and slid it onto her finger. Perfect fit. Of course it was. Min-jae controlled every detail. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll marry you." Relief and joy crashed across his expression. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her like she'd just given him something he'd stopped believing he deserved. And in the greenhouse, surrounded by flowers that required darkness before they could bloom, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible way chose to build something beautiful anyway. The wedding happened 3 months later in the garden behind the rebuilt mansion. Small, private, just immediate family and the people from Min-jae's organization who'd proven their loyalty through blood and fire. Zorya's mother cried through the entire ceremony. Marcus watched via video call from his supervised location, his own tears visible on the screen. Seoyun stood as Zorya's witness, her expression proud and almost maternal. Min-jae wore a black suit that made him look like he was attending a funeral or a coronation. Zorya wore white despite every traditional reason she probably shouldn't, because if they were going to do this, they were going to do it honestly, acknowledging what they'd survived to get here. The officiant kept it short. No flowery language about destiny or fate, just the simple legal words that bound two lives together. When Min-jae slid the wedding band onto her finger beside the engagement ring, his hands were steady. But when he spoke his vows, his voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly how rare and fragile happiness was in his world. "I promise to protect you," he said quietly, "to choose you over power, to love you even when it's dangerous, to build something with you that's worth surviving for." Zorya's vows were simpler. "I promise to stay, to fight beside you, to remind you why survival matters when you forget, to love you exactly as you are." They kissed as husband and wife while their small gathering of dangerous people and complicated family applauded. And Zorya realized something that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. She was happy. Genuinely, completely happy in a way that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with choosing the right person to be reckless with. The reception happened in the restored ballroom, food catered by the best restaurants in the city, music played by musicians who'd been paid enough to never speak about who hired them, champagne that cost more per bottle than Zorya used to make in a month. She danced with Min-jae under crystal chandeliers that had been replaced after the assault. His hand rested on her lower back, just above the scar from the bullet she'd taken for him, a permanent reminder of the night their relationship transformed from captivity into choice. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. "About marrying a crime boss?" "Not even one. You're supposed to say I'm a legitimate businessman. We both know better than that." He smiled, actually smiled in a way that reached his eyes. "We do." The song changed to something slower. Min-jae pulled her closer, and they swayed together, surrounded by people who'd kill for them without hesitation. "What happens now?" Zorya asked. "Now we live. However we can. For as long as we can." "That's not much of a plan." "It's the only plan people like us get." Zorya rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Then I guess we better make it count." "Yeah," Min-jae agreed, his arms tightening around her. "We better." Later, when the guests had left and the staff had cleaned up and the mansion had settled into quiet, Min-jae and Zorya stood in the greenhouse one more time. The white orchid, the one his mother had started and that had somehow survived everything, was blooming more beautifully than ever. Perfect white petals that seemed to glow in the moonlight filtering through glass walls. "She would have liked you," Min-jae said, staring at the flower. "Your mother?" "Yeah. She always said the strongest people weren't the ones who never broke. They were the ones who broke and rebuilt themselves into something better." "Is that what we did? Rebuilt ourselves?" "I think we built something new, something that didn't exist before." Zorya laced her fingers through his, feeling the wedding band press against her skin. "Something worth protecting." "Something worth dying for," Min-jae corrected. Then he paused, and more importantly, something worth living for. They stood there together in the darkness, two people who'd found each other in violence and chosen to create something gentle. Two people who understood that survival wasn't about avoiding danger, but about finding someone worth being dangerous for. The city beyond the greenhouse walls would always be brutal. Min-jae's world would always carry risks that normal people never faced. But in this moment, surrounded by flowers that bloomed in carefully controlled conditions, they had peace. Zorya thought about the exhausted waitress who'd fallen asleep on a subway train 6 months ago. The girl who'd felt invisible and trapped and desperately lonely. That version of herself felt like someone from a completely different life. This Zorya, the one wearing a wedding ring and standing beside the most dangerous man in the city, had been forged through captivity and bullets and impossible choices. She'd been broken down and rebuilt, and somehow emerged stronger than she'd ever been before. "I love you," she said quietly. Min-jun turned to look at her, his dark eyes soft in a way they only ever were with her. "I love you too, even though I probably shouldn't. Especially because you shouldn't." He laughed. Actually laughed. The sound echoed through the greenhouse like something precious and rare. And in that moment, Zorya understood something profound. Happiness wasn't about finding perfection. It was about finding someone whose broken pieces fit with yours in a way that made both of you whole. They were damaged, dangerous, completely wrong for each other by every conventional measure, but they were also real, and alive, and together. And that was more than enough. Outside, the city continued its endless cycle of violence and survival. Inside the greenhouse, two people who'd survived impossible odds held each other and watched orchids bloom in the darkness. Some love stories started with destiny. Theirs started with desperation. But it ended, or really began again, with a choice made freely by two people who understood exactly what they were choosing: danger, complexity, uncertainty, and underneath it all, love fierce enough to make surviving worthwhile. The last subway train that had brought them together rattled through distant tunnels, carrying strangers toward unknown destinations. But Zorya and Min-jun had found theirs, not in safety, not in simplicity, but in each other. And that truth, raw and imperfect and completely real, was the only ending their story ever needed. Peace to